So before we get started, I just need to read this fun note from our lawyers, and then we'll jump into our equity and cap table 101. So a word from our lawyers. This communication is on behalf of eShares Inc., DBA Carta Inc. This communication is not to be construed as legal, financial, or tax advice and is for informational purposes only. The communication is not intended as a recommendation, offer, or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Although this presentation may provide information concerning potential legal issues, it is not a substitute for legal advice, and any opinions or conclusions provided in this presentation shall not be ascribed to Carta. Carta does not assume any liability for reliance on the information provided herein. All right, and with that, I will get started. So thank you everybody for joining today. I am Kelly Aurelia. I'm here with my colleague, Matt King. We're both with Carta. I've been at Carta for almost 4 years. I'm on our business development team. I am based out of Boston, so I work with a lot of great companies, investors, law firms, accounting firms in the startup community here. Matt King is out of our Salt Lake City office. He's one of our senior implementations managers, which means that Matt spends a lot of time helping companies move their cap tables onto Carta. So when it comes to avoiding common cap table mistakes, Matt definitely has seen everything that could happen and is going to give us some of what he sees most commonly when he's working with companies. And with that, I'm going to jump over to the agenda. So we've split this presentation into 2 parts. In this first part, I'm going to go over some basics for cap table and equity, some key terms you should know. Why is your cap table important to your investors? What the cost of maintaining your cap table may look like. In the second half, we're going to look more at how to actually build a cap table. So if you've brought your cap table with you today, you can have it in front of you and compare with some of the examples we're going to give. Matt's going to talk about some of the common mistakes that he sees again when he's onboarding cap tables, and we'll close out with some building tips for your cap table, as well as some special offers we have for Startup Boston. And then if you guys do have questions, we do have the Slido, so please type in your questions as we're going along. I'll try to keep an eye on it and answer those. If we don't get to your question during the presentation, Matt and I will definitely follow up with you guys afterwards, but please send in any questions or feedback that you have as we're going through. So very basic question to start with here is, what is a cap table? So I love this, too long, didn't read. It's your startup's investing history, right? So who are the owners in your cap table? What types of equity are you issuing out? What's the overall capital structure, right? If it's a good cap table, you can look at it and see exactly who owns what and what's going on with your investing story. The truth of the matter is, though, a lot of the times that we see cap tables coming onto Carta, they already have mistakes in them. And mistakes can be as simple as just one number being typed incorrectly into an Excel spreadsheet. And the problem with that is, as your cap table grows and your company grows, mistakes that are made early on are going to grow as you go through subsequent financing rounds. And so the moral of the story, and something we talk a lot about at Carta, is this day one mentality with your cap table, right? Don't wait until you're at your Series A or prepping for your Series A to build your cap table and make sure that everything's accurate. You really want to start from day one, even if it's just 2 co-founders determining what their equity split in your startup's going to be. Make sure that that information is accurate to avoid bigger mistakes down the line. So what's the importance of cap tables for startups? These may seem obvious to some of you, but we're just going to go through them really quickly, and we do drive these points home throughout this presentation. We'll revisit some of these. So first, it helps you raise money on better terms and understand your dilution. A lot of times early stage founders, if you're going to do a safe note or a warrant or any sort of early stage financing, you want to understand what the dilution is going to be on your cap table. So it's going to help you understand the terms that are coming in from investors and what you actually want to issue out, whether it's to an investor or to an employee. With that being said, helps you land and retain key talent. When you're a startup, right, you are competing with Facebook and Amazon and Google to get talent for your company to build your business. The biggest leverage that you have is the equity that you're able to give to those employees. So making sure you have a really good understanding of your strategy around equity for compensation is going to be important when you're talking to prospective employees of your company. Clearly communicates what each investor and employee holds. That one's pretty obvious, right? You want to be able to know which investor owns what part of the company, and you want to be able to clearly communicate to employees what their ownership percentage is going to be and help them understand their option grants. A clean cap table will accelerate your VC financings. So you are going to look more polished and professional if you come with a cap table that's well organized, that shows that you understand the structure of your company and you understand the terms that you're going to be negotiating with your investors. The fifth one is it will grow and expand as your company grows. So that's another one that's pretty self-evident, right? Every time you go through a financing round, your cap table is going to get more complex. So making sure you start with the fundamentals and you build accurately from there is going to make sure that your cap table is always healthy. And it's a centralized repository where everyone knows that single source of truth. So when you're looking at your company's cap table, there are a lot of people that are involved, your investors, your legal counsel, different folks within the company. You want to make sure that you know which is the official accurate copy of your cap table and that everybody is looking at the same version. Whether you're using a software platform like Carta or Excel, that's going to apply either way. The next couple slides are just terms you should know. This goes into some equity basics and some cap table basics. So common and preferred stock. There's different share classes on your cap table. Every time you go through a financing round, you're going to add a share class. So you'll have your Series A, your Series B. If you have a convertible note, you'll have your common and you'll have your option pool. Common stock is what's most commonly issued to employees. There's no voting rights with common. Preferred stock is what's going to be issued to your investors. It's what gets paid out first in any sort of like exit or M&A event. Your pre and post money valuation is impacted when you go through a financing round. So your pre-money valuation is the price of the preferred shares for the investors. And then the post money is what is the value of those shares after the new financing has gone through. This slide looks at the life cycle of an option grant. So when you issue options to an employee, you're issuing the option to purchase a common share in the company at a later date. The cost of that common share is going to be set at the grant date. That's where the employee is going to get value out of their option grant. If you join an early stage startup where the options are going to be valued relatively low and you stay for several years, when you go to sell those options, once you've exercised, the value's gone up, but you exercise or purchase those common shares at the price on the grant date. The cliff and the vesting schedule are how long the employee has to stay at the company to have access to those options. And the reason that you put a vesting schedule in is so that if you take an employee and you give them, let's say, 1,000 options in the company, and they come and they exercise those options and leave the next day, you've given away a part of your company for an employee that did not stay that long. So the vesting schedule is correlated to how long the employee is at the company. Most commonly, we see a 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff. That means that the grant is issued when the employee starts. The 1-year cliff means that they do not get any options available to them until 1 year after their start date. At that point, they'd get a quarter of the total number of options issued. And then every month after that, for the next 3 years, they would get another chunk of their options issued until they were fully vested at the end of 4 years. There's 2 types of equity we see most commonly issued, ISOs and NSOs. The difference between those two are really when they're taxed. ISOs are most commonly issued to employees. NSOs are issued to non-employees, so advisors or consultants. NSOs taxed at the time of exercise. ISOs are taxed at the time of sale. And again, this all goes into your equity strategy. So how do you want to handle your option pool? How many options are you setting aside for employees? How much are you issuing to each employee? What is their vesting schedule going to be? You also want to consider their post-termination exercise window. So how long after the point of termination do they have to exercise their options? You can have different PT windows for involuntary and voluntary termination. So these are all things that you want to consider when you're putting together your overall strategy for how you're going to compensate employees with equity. Price per share is the price per share. That one's pretty obvious. Stock plan allocation, again, this goes into your equity strategy. How much are you allocating to your option pool to issue to employees? And your fully diluted capitalization is just, what does the cap table look like with all available shares, right? So outstanding options in the option pool, any outstanding shares that haven't been issued yet is your fully diluted capitalization. And again, these are terms that are going to be coming up when you're talking to your legal counsel, you're talking to folks about your cap table, and are just important terms to know. This is my last page of key terms. So your 409A valuation is a valuation you need to get if you're issuing options to employees. It's essentially when a third-party company comes in and sets the fair market value for your common stock, and that's the price that you're able to issue to employees. It helps protect employees from getting stock options that are either priced too high or too low. You have to get one every 12 months or every time the company goes through a material change, and a material change would be considered a financing round. We see companies starting to get 409A valuations as early as their seed round if they know they're going to be issuing a lot of options to employees. We always recommend that companies talk to their outside counsel or some sort of legal counsel to know when they should start getting their 409A valuations done. Your ownership percentage is the equity that one person holds out of the fully diluted cap table. So what percentage of the company do you own? Notes and safes are convertible securities, meaning that they don't convert to shares until the company goes through a priced round. It's a type of financing round that companies typically do very early on. We'll talk more about these later in the presentation, but the important thing to remember with notes and safes is that you need to make sure you understand the conversion rate of when they do convert to shares, of how that's going to dilute your equity in the company. And again, if you guys have questions on any of these, make sure you're submitting those over in Slido, and we will answer them during the presentation. All right, so I'm going to jump now into some common questions we get when we're talking to early stage founders about their cap table and their equity strategy. So one that we get often is, if you have no plans to take on investors, do you still need a cap table? And obviously at Carta, we're biased that everybody needs a cap table, but our answer to that question is yes. And this is going to go back to some of those key reasons of why your cap table is important. The first one just being to clarify your ownership with any of your business partners. If you have a co-founder, even if you are never going to take on any sort of outside investment, you still want a document that says who owns what in the company. How are you splitting equity with any of your co-founders or business partners? The second is, again, to incentivize current and prospective employees. You can still issue equity in the company, even if you're not taking money from outside investors. And the third and fourth are really about being prepared for future events. You may not be expecting to take in outside investment now, but you want to be ready to do so in the future. And you also want to be prepared for M&A opportunities. Part of the due diligence of going through an M&A process is having your cap table updated and accurate. So regardless of your intention to take on outside investment or not, you do want to have a cap table in place for these basic reasons, and to just make sure you're prepared for whatever could happen in the future. Our company is a 2-pizza team, so 2 co-founders. Who is responsible for the cap table? So this is going to change as the company grows. Early stage companies, it's really the founder or outside counsel. On Carta, for example, most of our customers' accounts have an outside counsel as an admin on the account, meaning that someone from their law firm, whether it's the lawyer or a paralegal, has access to their account to draft option grants, draft new share classes, help maintain the cap table, do board consents. So someone, either the founder internally or their outside counsel, is responsible for the cap table or different pieces for the cap table. Raising Series A and Series B, you could have a head of finance or operations that's helped maintaining the cap table. And anything later than that, companies typically have general counsel in-house that is helping to maintain the cap table with the help of outside counsel generally. We're taking a lean approach. What are the costs of keeping a clean cap table? So this question is a bit difficult to answer because it can really range. What you want to be aware of is that if you do make any mistakes on your cap table early on, the cost to fix that is going to be higher once you need to have an accurate version of your cap table. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about if a mistake is made early on in the cap table and you go through subsequent financing rounds, and at some point you find the error and need to fix it, it can rack up a lot of legal costs if you're having to go back into that cap table and figure out where the mistake was made and how it impacts all the people that have been added to the cap table since the error occurred, right? So if you have a really clear understanding of your cap table early on, you can keep the costs relatively low depending on how you choose to manage your cap table. And we'll look at some of those options later on in the presentation. But it's important to be aware of the costs, and those costs typically come from if you're using outside counsel to maintain your cap table, if you're using a software platform or not to maintain your cap table, and again, how active your cap table is going to be. Are you taking on outside investors? Are you issuing to employees? Are you going to do a safe or convertible note? And those things are all going to add to the costs. This is our one kind of salesy slide, but just so that everyone's here aware, we do have a special offer for Startup Boston. Carta Launch is our free option for early stage companies. If you have less than $1 million raised and under 25 equity holders, you can use Carta Launch for free. I have this URL up at the end of the presentation too, so you guys can take it down then. But with Carta Launch, it's all your electronic issuances and cap table management, as well as our note and safe calculator, are included in this tool to help startups get their cap table started. Okay, so now that we've gone through a lot of the basics, we're going to switch over to cap table workshop, which if you have your cap table with you today and you have it in front of you, you can look at some of the examples we're going to go through and see if they apply to your own cap table, and look for some of the common errors that we have listed for you guys. If you have questions pertaining to your specific cap table, you can put them in Slido if it's not sensitive information. I also have my email at the end, so you can email questions to us. But be sure to ask us if anything comes up that pertains to your specific cap table. So let's look at some examples. So company A, this is our back of the napkin cap table. So in the example that's pictured here, you have $100,000 for 5% of XYZ company, and Reed and Jack have signed this napkin. The problem with this type of cap table is, does this information ever make it back to a cap table that has the founders on it, that has any other individuals that are on the cap table, their employees, right? Is there an actual legal share agreement that's been issued, right? So if you have any sort of one-off document that's sitting out there somewhere where you've come up with an agreement with an investor or even a co-founder that says who owns what in the company, but you haven't sat down and actually made that document into the cap table, into an actual share agreement, you'll want to do that just to make sure that everything is legal and you're avoiding any issues with, you know, what if this napkin gets lost, or the actual like legalities behind this agreement. So if you're looking down at a napkin right now, we would highly recommend that you take that napkin and turn it into a cap table. All right, company B, this is a dilution example. So earlier when I was talking about safe notes and warrants, right? So pre-money safes, 12.5% ownership, post-money safes, 14.2. It seems like a small difference, but that can really add up. So when you're issuing a safe note or a convertible note, you want to make sure you go through all of the different scenario modelings to make sure you fully understand when that note converts to preferred share, what is the overall dilution going to be on the cap table. There are a lot of tools online. You can Google safe note calculator. Carta has one at safestockcarta.com. It's free to use. And to model out what that dilution is going to look like on your cap table. We also highly recommend you talk to legal counsel or someone that's issued a safe note before, maybe another founder that's done it, just so you make sure you understand what that dilution is going to be after that safe note converts. All right, and our last example is find the error. So this is a very basic cap table that someone could have built in Excel. You can see the total authorized shares doesn't add up to the total at the bottom of the cap table. When you're working in Excel, this is very common that one number can be off that throws off the entire cap table, and it can take a lot of time and money to go through. You can see if it wasn't just a 2-line item cap table, all the line items that someone would have to go through to find that mistake and then make sure that it's accurate. All right, I'm going to pass it to Matt to go over some common cap table errors that he sees. And again, Matt's one of our senior implementation managers at Carta. So his job every day is to help companies put their cap tables onto our platform. So he's seen cap tables in all sorts of different, versions and forms, and has a lot of experience with this. So Matt, I'll pass it over to you.
Hey everyone. So I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, and so I've seen about everything, hopefully. But one thing from the very beginning is, as Kelly mentioned, is it's really important to keep track of everything on your cap table. And so even in her example, that very simple cap table, not really detailed enough. You should include any variable terms that could impact your cap table, in your cap table. So, and the example with safes where, don't give your company away, make sure you're consulting your attorney. Even though those safe notes are available for free, you can download them from, I believe, YC Combinator's website. It's still important that you consult with your attorney just to make sure that you're, giving them away at the right. I mean, you're, taking money at the right terms that is more, beneficial to the founders. But as far as what's in your cap table and the most common errors, and how they can get compounded, like in Kelly's example cap table, if you don't mind going back to that for just a second. This could be just as simple as like an error where, the pool was just, I guess maybe not totally in this case, but, sometimes shares get double counted when, stuff gets issued from the plan, but you're not reflecting it that way on the cap table. This isn't a perfect example of that, but that's one of the things that I see most common is like double counting of common shares that have been issued from the plan and not from the plan. So that kind of brings me to like, keeping your cap table, have just one single source of truth, whether you're using Carta or whether you're using any other software. Usually one of the big benefits of that is you and your attorney are working with the same cap table. And so you're always on the same page as your attorney, because that's the most common issue is you've got a cap table, your attorney has another cap table, and they're not always in agreement for whatever reason. You may have done something without consulting your attorney. And sometimes if you do something without consulting your attorney, it's going to be expensive to fix. If you ever hear the term from your attorney, like nunc pro tunc, that means basically now for then. It's very expensive, and what it means is you've done so many wrong things on your cap table that they're just basically starting over and then fixing everything. And so you don't want to put yourself in that position, and so make sure that you're working with, whether it's your attorney. If you're not good at managing equity for whatever reason, you might be like an ops person, or you might be an engineer, or whatever the case may be. If you're not best suited to manage your company's equity, you've always got your attorney. You can hire an outside CFO, for example, that would have that knowledge. And just keep in mind that you may save money today, but you may pay for it in the long run because you've done something like materially wrong, whatever that may be. But and that's where it's important to pick the right attorney. And so, if you know what kind of business you want to be, what kind of structure you're looking for, whether you're going to, hire offshore people to, help manage engineering or whatever the case may be, find an attorney that can help you with the specific needs of your company. And, you know, that can be like crucial as far as, you know, picking the right attorney. Because another thing where we see a lot of messy cap tables is where they've switched from one attorney to another, and you just lose something every time that happens. And that may not be the intent, but it happens. It happens all the time. And as far as, let's see here, got a couple things written down. Like Kelly mentioned, you know, there's free cap tables out there. She'll give you a link to, you know, to where you can use Carta Launch, and that's for, you know, early stage companies. But manage something electronically. It's way easier than Excel, because Excel, you know, you may not be the expert using Excel, and it's very easy to make mistakes, and those mistakes can be super costly. Anything you think I've missed, Kelly?
No, I think that's good. I think the double counting out of the option pool is definitely one that I've heard before. Again, Matt sees way more cap tables than I do. I think the other one I've seen too is duplicate stakeholders when their names aren't matching up. Just really small things like that to make sure you're being super.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, like duplicate stakeholders, when you see that, you may, like, you know, if they're, you know, on two lines, like say you've got, you know, their first name, last name, and you've got last name, first name, they might not be close to each other on the cap table if you've got, you know, 20, 30, 50 stakeholders. And so when you go to issue them, like say a refresher option grant or something like that, you may be looking at one row and you might issue them too much because you're like, oh, they only have this much ownership, you know, they're this important, they should maybe have this amount. And so that's definitely a good thing to look at as well. One other thing is, like, I would kind of think of things like from when you like organize, like, you know, future, you may like raise money. Do you think you'll need to, you know, to do a stock split, you know, later down stocks?
Did Matt just freeze for everybody else or just me?
It looks like we may have lost him momentarily.
I wasn't sure if that was from my side or your side. I can just keep
Me
going.
too. Yeah, you can pick it up. And everyone, can you please like put your questions in Slido? As much as I love talking to you all on chat here, Kelly's on the Slido link. So put your questions there. And I think Matt's still coming back now. Welcome back, Matt.
We lost you there for a second. I can jump into the next slide too. All right. Here we go. Okay, so with all of that in mind, we're going to wrap things up with it's time to build. So a few different options you have to build your cap table. And then the last slide will have all of the offers from Carta for you guys to take down those URLs. So when you're starting to think about your cap table, if you want to start from scratch or just make sure that your cap table is accurate, the first thing you want to do is to capture all of the documentation that you need to build your cap table. So your finalized understanding of your equity split with your co-founders, your incorporation documents, your stock purchase agreements. If you have an option pool, you need your stock plan documentation, any other convertibles that you've issued, and any relevant board actions. So once you have all of those things in front of you, then you can decide, okay, how do I want to create my cap table? And we'll go over 3 different options that you have. So the first option is to build from scratch. That is opening up an Excel document that is completely blank and starting with like line item 1, I own this much, my co-founder owns this much, and these are our investors. The pros to that is you can get really specific and granular with how you want your cap table set up. The con of that is obviously it's hard to build, it's hard to collaborate on, it's hard to maintain the cap table. I would also say with the pros of this, it doesn't cost anything, right? Other than your Microsoft license or your Google Docs license, right? and it would end up looking something like this. I think, you know, in my experience in talking to a lot of founders about their cap tables over the last 4 years is if you're doing something that is too unique to your company, you'll want to ask yourself, why am I choosing to issue something non-standard, right? When you're going to hire employees or you're going to investors, if you have something that's non-standard on your cap table, it's going to be hard for you to communicate the value of the equity to the employee if it's not something they're used to seeing, and to explain to your investor why your cap table is set up that way. So we do see sometimes that founders want to get creative with their cap tables, and our recommendation is to just keep it simple, right? And I think that's one thing that can be tricky when you're building your own cap table is you have no structure behind what you're actually building. So you can kind of get yourself into a tricky situation if you can't explain what's going on within your cap table. Your second option is to use a template. The pro of this is it's a really quick way to start. It gives you some structure. It's usually free. You can Google free cap table templates online and find some. Carta has one on our website. Again, it has the same cons as the Excel spreadsheet, right? It's easy to make errors. It's hard to collaborate. It's hard to maintain once the cap table grows. I think with a lot of startups, a template could be a good place to start if you're not ready to spend money on a cap table software like Carta. Definitely better than just a blank Excel document. But again, keeping in mind those challenges so that you know when and if you do want to, you know, migrate to a more robust software platform. And this is what our free cap table template looks like. It's on our website. Again, you can Google free cap table template and find them on the internet. And option 3 would be a cap table software like Carta. Again, this is the easiest way to keep your cap table updated. Matt mentioned this when he was speaking. Your law firm, your outside counsel, whoever you have, if you're using a temp CFO or an accounting firm, everyone has access to the same cap table. So there's no version control that needs to happen. It's the best way to communicate visibility to your investors, to your employees. They'll have logins to see their individual ownership, their vesting schedules, their exercise. The con is it does cost money. And with that, I'm going to close it out with the Startup Boston offer. And I just noticed that we do have some questions in the actual chat. Sorry, I wasn't keeping an eye on this earlier. So let me go over these Startup Boston offers really quick, and then I'll run through these questions and see if we can get some of them answered for you guys. So our first offer is our first year discount offer. So it's 20% off of a first year subscription and waived onboarding fees. So you can get that at carta.com/referral/startupboston. And again, that's for any of our paid subscriptions. If you want to see information on our paid subscriptions, you can go to carta.com/pricing, and that will give you an overview of all of our different subscription plans, what's included in those. Most common are our starter and growth subscription packages, which include all of your basic cap table issuances and your 409A valuations. The second offer is for Carta Launch, which is again for companies with up to $1 million raised and under 25 stakeholders. You can use Carta Launch. It's free cap table management software. So all of your electronic issuances, so issuing equity to employees, founders, early investors, you can do that all electronically on Carta and manage your cap table. It doesn't include like 409A valuations or some of the other compliance tools. The nice thing with signing up through the Startup Boston offer is you will be flagged as a Startup Boston company. So if you upgrade, you still get that 20% off at the time that you upgrade, whether you upgrade in 6 weeks from now or a year from now. And you can find that. It's a little bit of a longer URL at carta.com/launch/services/startupboston. And if you don't want to write down either of those URLs, you can email me and I will point you in the right direction. It's kelly.aurelia@carta.com. And again, I'm going to make note of all of these questions. So if we don't get to them in the presentation, I'll make sure I follow up with folks. But if you do have any questions specific to what we talked about today, we also have a great Equity 101 series on our support site. It's support.carta.com. That you can go through and find a lot of the information we went over today. And again, you can always email me if you have questions or you want me to point you in the direction of some of these resources that we talked about today, whether it's our cap table template, our safe end note calculator, or anything else that we discussed. So let me just scroll through here.
I'm
Uh,
back, by the way. Are you going through the questions on Slido?
yeah. So one question here is, how much detail do you share with employees about the cap table? Everybody wants to have a general idea of what their options are worth. General counsel tells you not to share anything, but I tend to offer some detail. So this is a great question. You have options with Carta. So for myself as a Carta employee, obviously we use Carta to issue our equity. When I log into Carta, whether on my computer or even from our app, so I can log in from my phone, I can see our investors. I cannot see their ownership percentages, and I cannot see the option pool, which means I have limited access to Carta's cap table. Transparency has always been super important to our founder and our executive team. And so they want their employees to know who our investors are. And so they give us that access. It's completely up to you. You can give your employees no access at all. You have control over them seeing even their own ownership percentage in the company. So you set all of those preferences when you're issuing options to your employees. How do you capture milestone-based equity in the cap table? So we have both time and milestone-based vesting schedule options. You build out your vesting schedule menu during the onboarding process, which means you would work with someone like Matt to create a menu of your most commonly used vesting schedules. If you have a unique milestone-based vesting schedule for a specific person or group of people, you can create a custom milestone-based vesting schedule where you put in the milestones, and then you would manually trigger when those would vest based on the completion of whatever that milestone is, whether it's a project or some sort of, accomplishment within the company.
If you're keeping track of that on Excel, you would obviously want to just make sure that you track as much data as possible, which would include whether a vesting schedule includes milestones. Because sometimes you've got you've got pieces of it that are time-based and pieces of it that are milestone-based. And so, if you're using Excel, obviously keep track of it. But if not, it's available on Carta.
And I just noticed that I needed to refresh Slido. So I saw 0 questions and now I see 11. So I think we have enough time to get through a lot of these. And Matt, I'll ping to you if I can't answer any of these myself. So what is the typical cost for legal counsel for setting up and 409A? So setting up your cap table through legal counsel is really going to depend on what kind of law firm you go through. If you go through a larger law firm or a more boutique law firm, it really can range. So I would just ask them upfront about their costs. Make sure you have a really clear understanding of what they're going to be charging before you engage with the law firm. 409A valuations can also vary. Typically, they're going to be a few $1,000s per valuation if you're going with a boutique firm. With Carta, they're included in all of our paid subscriptions. So your annual and then any additional needed for material changes is included in the annual cost of Carta, which is typically around the cost of a single 409A from a boutique firm. Where can I find a meaningful cap table in Excel to understand how it looks? Excel files that I found online are either too simplistic or too meaningful. You can start with Carta's cap table template. It's based out of Excel. You can find it on our website. I think if you go to our blog, which is blog.carta.com, and you search in our blog for our founder toolkit, it'll take you to one of our blog posts where you can download our founder toolkit, which includes a copy of our template cap table in Excel. That's a good place to start. We answered this one. So is the cap table best left for lawyers or professionals like Carta to handle on behalf of the startup? So the important thing to think about when you're considering a software is typically a software provider for cap table management like Carta. We're not maintaining the cap table for you. We are a software that is put in place to help you maintain your cap table. So someone at the company still needs to set up different share classes, set up your option pool, draft and issue things out of the cap table when you hire employees. Carta makes that much easier for companies to do because we're setting almost like the safety lanes when you're bowling, right? To try to make sure that everything stays accurate. With that being said, most of our customers have their law firm as a user on their account so that someone at the law firm is helping them maintain their cap table.
And most of the bigger corporate law firms, they've got a lot of paralegals that usually manage the day-to-day, and they're super users on Carta. They know exactly how to use our software. So they're going to be best positioned to do it for you. But like, in some instances, if you think that you can handle it, then, you can make that decision.
What do you mean by third party comes in to set the price for common stock? So that's what a 409A valuation is. It's when a outside company, so someone that is not affiliated or employed by your company, values the fair market value for your common shares. And there's a lot of firms out there that do 409A valuations. Carta is the largest provider of 409A valuations currently. So it's just making sure that somebody not associated with the company is looking at the company's value to set that fair market value. And the 409A is the report that they provide with to you at the end of the valuation so that you can say, this is where I got the fair market value from, and it's documented how they came to that conclusion. What is the recourse if my cap table is messed up? So that really depends on what the error is, right? If it's a small error, so let's say you issue options to an employee and you add an extra 0 at the end of the number of options they're getting. If you catch a mistake like that quickly, it's pretty easy to fix. You can just reissue that option grant, have the employee sign the new option and make a note about why it was changed, right? Which can be a clerical error. If it's something larger than that, like I don't know, Matt, if you have any examples of maybe some larger recourse that came from a cap table being messed up, but at the end of the day, it's when you need your accurate cap table, it's how much time is it going to take from your law firm or from people internally at your company to dig through all the line items of your cap table and find the error and then figure out how to fix it, which if it impacts multiple people on your cap table, that can be more complicated than smaller errors.
Yeah, and I'd say it kind of depends on who makes the error. Like if it's small errors and your law firm made it, they usually will fix it and they're not going to bill you for it. But if you made the error, it could cost, who knows? It could cost very little to quite a bit. I'll have some companies that are going to onboard onto Carta, and their law firm just tells me that their cap table is too messy and they need to go through what they call a cap table cleanup. If they ever tell you that can be very expensive.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. So next question is, does Carta help with accounting under ASC 718 too? The answer is yes. I did not talk about that today. We were focused more on some earlier stage cap table features, but we do ASC 718, which is an expense reporting. So for those of you who aren't familiar, when you start getting audited, you need to do an ASC 718, which is your stock comp expense report, which is just expensing your options to your employees. Carta does do this. Since we already have the cap table on the platform, you're able to log into Carta, set your assumptions, set the dates you want the report to run on, and it will create the report for you that you can use for all of your GAAP accounting needs and your audit needs. It's part of our later stage packages. So if you go on our website to look at the different subscription options, you'll see expense reporting and some of the later stage options, but we do full ASC 718 on our platform as well. A couple more questions. Where is the handoff between Carta and the lawyer? So in Carta, you log in as a company admin and you're able to access your account and add the law firm. Once you add your law firm, both your lawyer and their paralegal can have access to the account. So everybody's looking at the same information. They're all logging into the same system. So there's not so much of the handoff as everyone's logging into Carta and they're able to do what they need to do. And those changes are reflected to you at the company and to the law firm. The permission sets kind of control who can change what. Typically, we see the company set as a company editor and then the law firm user set as a legal administrator. The legal administrator is the only person that can make changes to the cap table. The company editor can draft. So let's say you want to go in and draft the option grants. You would still need your law firm to log in and review everything before it gets actually issued out and it changes the cap table. That's typically how we see it set up, but it's up to you how you want to handle the permission sets within your own account and how you want to interact with your law firm on what they'll be doing and what the company will be doing. Other companies are completely hands off. They have a company login, but they really let their law firm do all of the cap table maintenance. So we see a lot of different versions of how those two parties interact on Carta.
And let me just butt in for just a second in regards to that. One thing that's kind of important to note is that, you know, your law firm, whenever you are like raising money or you know, going to do a financing, a lot of the law firms, you know, since they're providing their legal opinion, if you've been managing the cap table, that means that they have to go and review your cap table and look at every single data point on your cap table to make sure that it's correct. Whereas if your legal has been managing it from day one, they're the only ones that have had their hands in the collective cookie jar, if you will. And so they can give you that legal opinion without a whole lot of, you know, work on their end.
Awesome. All right, 2 more questions. Say I use Carta for cap table. If some point down the line I have a new co-founder investor round, who is responsible to change the cap table? So at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to make sure your cap table is up to date. If you bring in a new co-founder, you're going to want to make sure you set up a new equity plan with how you're splitting equity with that co-founder. When new investors come in, you're responsible to make sure that you have enough shares allocated for that round of what you're issuing to those investors, right? A lot of times, again, companies are working with their law firm to make sure all of these things are kept updated and accurate. They're logging into Carta. You can very easily see when you're using a platform like Carta what you have left to allocate. You can set up the new share classes, make sure that all of that is adding up to 100, right? But at the end of the day, as the founder or the CEO of the company or the CFO of the company, you're the one that's responsible to make sure that the cap table is up to date. And the last question is, in the 409A evaluation, does the valuation take into consideration the existing cost of development? What if the company is not cash flow positive? Yes, it does. So a lot of the evaluations we do are for companies that are not cash flow positive. There's, and again, I'm not a valuation analyst, so I can't go into the weeds on this, but there's different valuation methodologies that an analyst is going to use depending on the stage of the company and the type of company, right? So if you're a life science or healthcare company versus a tech company, if you're cash flow positive, if you're not cash flow positive yet, they're going to look at all of that information on the company before they decide what methodology to use to value the company. And they'll do that based on that. So whether you're cash flow positive or not, the valuation is going to take into consideration all the value of the company.
So they'll do asset-based or back solve, just depending on what stage the company is. So
yeah,
it looks like there's a couple more questions, Kelly, if you refresh.
Refreshing it. Is it down here? Okay, here we go. I've been asked by potential employees to see the cap table so they can figure out how much their options would be worth. So with Carta, you can share the cap table with an employee once they've accepted their option grant. If they're not an employee yet, you can create, we have a feature called Data Room where you can create a secure folder that you can put the cap table in and then invite that person who's not on your cap table yet to access that folder. It's all watermarked and secure so that they can see the cap table. And you know, as always, it's up to you if you want to share that information with a prospective employee or not. What are the best resources for early stage pre-revenue, pre-seed valuation range resources? There's a lot of great resources on the internet. I mentioned it before, but the Carta blog, if you go to the blog.carta.com and search founder toolkit, there's a ton of great resources in there, including our safe and no calculator, our cap table template, our Equity 101 series for founders. You know, places like YC, they have great resources as well. I think if you're going to a reputable company like Carta or reputable accelerators website, you should be able to find a lot of resources for early stage companies. What kind of differences could we find in the cap table module versus cap table module from European startups? Okay, wait, what kind of differences? So the question is, what are the cap table? I think the cap table differences between an American startup and a European startup. That's a great question. I may have to answer that one offline. I think in essence, cap tables are pretty similar. Carta supports international companies. So the backbone of a cap table is going to be similar. The biggest difference is the type of equity that you're issuing out and the compliance requirements around it, right? So if you're not a US based company, you may not be required to do a 409A. You may not be required to do ASC 718 expense accounting, right? But the structure of the cap table, share classes, the equity that you're issuing is still going to be the same. So I think if you're looking for like a cap table template, the one on Carta would work whether you're a US based company or not. The differences are going to come in more of the minute details of the type of equity you're issuing out, some of the nomenclature around, shares, like total authorized share count is a US based term that you may not hear if you're not a US based company. So there's some smaller things like that that you'll run into if you're not US based.
Yeah, and some of the other differences are like what it's called. And so, a lot of like, UK companies, they issue very similar things. It's just called something different. So, they refer to everything like where we call it common shares, they would call it ordinary shares. Where we call it preferred shares, they may call it preference shares. Like stock options, if it's a incentive stock option, they might call it, ESOP. Whereas if it's a non-qualified stock option, they may call it unapproved. That's it at a high level, but really, the structures are not all too different.
Awesome. And our last question, does Carta allow you to store the legal documents with the cap table, like signed common stock grants? So yes. So one of the biggest differentiators about Carta is that we are not only a record keeper for your cap table, we're a live transfer agent. So you're not only just keeping track of your cap table on Carta, you're actually issuing out the actual share agreements and option grants. So all of the documents that need to be signed with those issuances are attached in Carta, and all the signatures are done electronically, and everything's stored in Carta. So it really becomes a single source of truth for all of your company's equity and related documents. We have a full library in there where you can store all of your incorporation documents, security filings, all of those board resolutions, everything. So there's no need for like Dropbox, DocuSign. If you're using Carta, it all happens in a single workflow. I think that's everything. Again, if you didn't get a chance to submit a question or you have questions that come up later, feel free to email them over to me. If I can't answer it, I'll loop in Matt to help answer questions. And please take a look at the different offers that we have for Startup Boston. And thank you everybody again for taking time to chat with us today.